In the past, it was a staple of kidnappings for the hostage to hold up a newspaper to prove that they're still alive. The problem with me is that I started reading the newspapers that I was holding up, although I'm still, as you can judge by our social media overlords, in captivity. Nevertheless, I'll try my best to get what news I can out to you given the constraints. First up, stories on the domestic news front that I'm tracking. Today, tensions rose on the Texas border, not due to dust-ups with Mexican cartels, but due to conflict with the Department of Homeland Security, which wants access to certain stretches of the Texas border. They want to ensure that that border remains porous and open, whereas Governor Greg Abbott declared an invasion and released a statement saying that Texas has a right to defend itself if the feds won't stand up. He wrote, "The executive branch of the United States has a constitutional duty to enforce federal laws protecting states, including immigration laws on the books right now. President Biden has instructed his agencies to ignore federal statutes that mandate the detention of illegal immigrants. The failure of the Biden administration to fulfill the duties imposed by Article 4, Section 4 has triggered Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, which reserves to this state the right of self-defense. For these reasons, I have already declared an invasion under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 to invoke Texas's constitutional authority to defend and protect itself. That authority is the supreme law of the land and supersedes any federal statute to the contrary." This conflict stems from the Texas National Guard putting up a razor wire to stop the human tidal wave across the Texas-Mexican border. President Biden set about removing that barrier, and the Supreme Court recently upheld Biden's decision to remove the razor wire. Governor Abbott is standing up not only for his state, but for the concept of rule of law, which the federal layer of government is duly abrogating. And Abbott isn't alone. Several other states have issued statements openly supporting Abbott's stance. States like Florida, Georgia, Virginia, Utah, and so forth. Another person signaling support is former President Donald Trump, who weighed in to say, "We encourage all willing states to deploy their guards to Texas to prevent the entry of illegals and to remove them back across the border. All Americans should support the common sense measures by Texas authorities to protect the safety, security, and sovereignty of Texas and the American people. When I am president, on day one, instead of fighting Texas, I will work hand in hand with Governor Abbott and other border states to stop the invasion, seal the border, and rapidly begin the largest domestic deportation operation in history. Those Biden has let in should not get comfortable, because they will be going home." The Department of Homeland Security, headed up by the embattled and largely discredited Alejandro Mayorkas, filed a motion to prevent Texas from defending itself. DHS will be heading there today, which may see things come to a head, as J. Michael Waller feared in this statement.
Mayorkas was born in Cuba and then came as an infant to the United States. The thing is, Cuban Americans his age, he's about my age, who came here as infants from Cuba are really anti-communist, really hardcore, have no sympathy at all toward that regime, no tolerance toward it. But the few who are very tolerant about it and who do look the other way, like Mayorkas, you really have to wonder who got to them and how. This is not like an accident. This is not negligence. This is all calculated. Why is it calculated? We haven't established why. But it's so orchestrated that even when Texas says, okay, you know what, they're overrunning our state, we're going to keep them out of our state. And then now there's federal action, and right now it's just legal action. But what happens if Biden and Mayorkas send federal troops in to disarm Texas National Guard, to enforce the destruction of the barriers that the Texas National Guard is setting up? Are we going to get into a shooting situation where the central government is shooting Texas National Guard? Because that's where it looks like it might be headed.
Chaos is always the result of when rule of law breaks down. John Locke, in 2 treatises of civil government, said that tyranny was the projection of power without legal authority. Abbott is standing for the law, and the federal layer of government is projecting power without legal authority. Their amazing assertion is that they exist to make sure that the law is not enforced. Speaking of tyranny, this brings us to international news. Turns out Tucker Carlson caused quite a ruckus in Canada recently when he went up there and warned Canadian patriots about the dangers of tolerating tyranny.
If you're killing 50,000 of your citizens, if the government is doing that through the MAID program, and a lot of them are not actually terminally ill, they're just sad, and the government is encouraging them to submit to being killed by the government, and then we'll release the recent statistics. Like, what is that? What is that? Yeah, it's genocide. That's exactly what it is. It's killing large groups of people. And who are those people, by the way? We don't know, because your government hasn't released the stat. What percentage of those were born in Canada? I bet right around 100%. So if you're a government, you have the duty to your citizens, people who are from here, people whose ancestors built the place, not exclusively to them, but primarily to them, to your citizens. Like, why else do you exist except to serve your citizens? And if you're targeting your citizens, how many people who arrived in Canada in the last 10 years have opted into the MAID program? I don't know the answer. I bet around 0. It's all people who are from here. Another government brags, oh, we're saving money because they died. That's the darkest thing I can imagine. I bet there's zero conversation about that in this country because I know this country and I know what it's like. It's too horrible. No one wants to talk about it. You should talk about it. But more than anything, you should internalize the message of that, which is they hate me. They hate me to the point they're willing to kill me, which they are. And the third thing is, notice the erosion of your most basic civil liberties, not the ones granted to you by the crown, but the ones granted to you by God. And those would include the freedom of speech, which is inalienable. It cannot be taken from you no matter who is in Ottawa. Your rights remain the same because you were born with them, because you are not a slave, you're a human being. And you have inherent dignity because God made you. That's just a fact. And if they're taking those rights away piecemeal and doing so in the name of public safety, even as they make the public sphere much more dangerous, which they have, in case you haven't noticed, Canada has a lot more violent crime now than it did 20 years ago. Have you noticed? Of course you have. You live here. And they're telling you can't defend yourself against that crime. We're going to disarm you. You can't protect your life or your family. And you're like, oh yeah, it's for the public safety. It's just not a big deal. These are weapons of war. No, they're weapons of self-defense, which you need and deserve as a free person, not a slave. And then they're telling you can't complain about it. And then they're subsidizing the media to the point where all of your big media outlets, which are disgusting, are state media because they're taking state cash. Do you watch CBC? I do, occasionally. I can turn in any hour of the day and I will learn that I'm racist for driving an SUV and not being trans. That's the whole schedule of CBC program.
Yeah.
So if they're limiting your freedom to say what you think, which is freedom of conscience, the most basic of all freedom, your freedom to defend yourself and your family against bodily harm, which has got to be a twin to the first one. If they're taking away your voting power by changing the population of your country, which they are doing, and no one wants to talk about that, Canada has the highest immigration rate in the world per capita. And shut up, racist! That's not racist. I don't care if you're coming from New Zealand. I don't care if you're taking the population of Stockholm and moving them to Canada. If you change the population of the country, you change the country. And you dilute the voting power of the people who are vested in that country, the people who were born there, who have lived there long term, who understand the history and the culture of the country, who are bought in. And all of a sudden, their vote means much less. It's math.
The ruling party of Canada immediately bristled and demanded that the Conservative candidate for Prime Minister, Pierre Poilievre, should immediately denounce these inflammatory calls to freedom.
You brought up Pierre Poilievre's name in your comment. I mean, is this going to be your strategy effectively going forward, is tying Pierre Poilievre to Trump?
He wants to be Prime Minister of this country. What happened last night is not acceptable. Is he going to condemn that? If he wants to run for Prime Minister, he should have the courage to condemn those. It's not acceptable in our country.
So is that going to be your strategy?
People attended, sir. I mean, what do you make of the fact that there is an audience for it and for their perspective?
Well, as I said in French, the extreme right politics, don't ask the question if it's coming to Canada. It's already here.
Is this
and they're bringing it.
Evidently, they want people not to notice that they're promoting euthanasia campaigns at their own citizens and openly calling for them to be killed. One might reasonably construe that this government is placing itself in a position with being at war with the people, which the aforementioned John Locke talked about. He said, whenever the legislators endeavor to take away and destroy the property of the people, or to reduce them to slavery under arbitrary power, they put themselves in a state of war with the people, who are thereupon absolved from any farther obedience. Canada's government, which doesn't see itself as the preservers of the posterity of Canada, but rather as the managers of the controlled demolition of the place, are angry that they're being called out. The whole point of government is to serve its citizens, not make a better life for foreigners. So logical students of political science might find their behavior weird, which takes us into our News of the Weird segment. Evidently, an American Airlines flight had to turn around when a passenger couldn't contain his explosive flatulence. An American Airlines plane was reportedly forced to return to the gate due to high wind, a disgruntled passenger's smelly farts, The big stink over the flatulent flyer unfolded while a recent flight from Phoenix, Arizona to Austin, Texas was still on the ground, according to a viral Reddit post. Before most people had boarded, I observed that this man was audibly disgruntled about something, maybe hungover, rough day, I don't know. But as soon as he sat down, he was grumbling about something under his breath, like effing hell or something, user Lam Galadix wrote. Evidently, civility is broken down in our society as standards decayed, ethics collapsed, and religion withdrew from the public square. With people not knowing the difference between fame and merely being conspicuous, it led to a bunch of charmers, like this guy, who thinks it's funny to invade other people's space on an airplane.
Okay, so I'm really gassy right now because I've been eating a lot of gassy stuff, and I'm just going to walk down the aisle and fart on some people. Okay, I think this is called crop dusting. I'm going to hold the microphone by my ass so you can hear it.
Earlier, we invoked John Locke's 2 treatises of civil government. It begs a question. Can we have a civil government if we don't have civil behavior among the people? Is civility dead? That leads us into obituaries. Harry Connick Sr., father of the famous actor and singer, died at the age of 97. Harry Connick Sr., who was New Orleans district attorney for 3 decades and later faced allegations that his staff sometimes held back evidence that could have helped defendants, died Thursday at age 97. Connick died peacefully at his home in New Orleans with his wife Londa and his children Susanna and musician and actor Harry Connick Jr. by his side, according to an obituary distributed by Harry Connick Jr.'s publicist. The cause of death was not provided. Connick dethroned an incumbent prosecutor, Jim Garrison, in a 1973 election. He won re-election 4 times and successfully built biracial support as the city's political power base shifted to African Americans. And with that, I'd like to thank you for watching the show, or as I like to call it, that suspicious gap in my resume. See you next time. By the way, before you go, run over to Apple Podcasts and check out my new enterprise, Classic Paranormal. If you like it, be sure to subscribe. It's basically just me reading true accounts of psychic research from the past, eerie stuff that really happened, ghosts, mediums, poltergeists, and so forth, from books that time forgot. Once again, it's called Classic Paranormal. If you want hours of easy listening pleasure, be sure to subscribe.